The sky above Zalari Prime did not just burn. It screamed. Commander Elias Rourke fought the controls of his U-29 Raptor with the desperation of a man who knew the mathematics of his own death. The atmosphere of the alien moon was thicker than Earth's, tearing at the ablative heat shielding of his reconnaissance craft like a wild animal stripping meat from bone. Alarms blared in a discordant symphony, a chaotic rhythm of red lights and mechanical shrieks that filled the cramped cockpit. Altitude, 40,000 feet and dropping like a stone. Elias gritted his teeth, the taste of copper and adrenaline sharp on his tongue. His mission had been simple, a silent orbital sweep to map Northern Hemisphere heat signatures. He was never supposed to enter the atmosphere. He was never supposed to be seen. But the particle cannon that had clipped his starboard wing had come from nowhere. A silent beam of violet light that shredded his stealth drives before he could even curse. The horizon spun violently. Through the reinforced glass, he saw a blur of emerald jungle and jagged obsidian mountain peaks rushing up to meet him. He engaged the thrusters, praying the hydraulics held together for 10 more seconds. Come on, he thought, his vision graying at the edges as the G-force hammered his chest. Just hold it together. The ship groaned, metal shearing against the atmospheric density. He punched the ejection sequence, but the panel sparked and died. He was riding this coffin all the way down. With a final guttural roar of defiance, Elias pulled back on the yoke, forcing the nose up, trying to turn a fatal impact into a survivable crash. The trees swallowed him. The impact was not a single event but a series of violent collisions. The wings shore off against the trunks of massive ironwood trees. The fuselage tumbled, carving a trench of fire and broken earth through the dense undergrowth. The world became a cacophony of tearing metal and shattering glass. Then, silence. It was a heavy, wet silence, broken only by the hiss of cooling engines and the crackle of small fires. Elias hung upside down in his harness. Blood dripped from his nose, pooling on the shattered canopy above his head. His left leg was a tapestry of agony, likely broken, and his ribs felt as if they had been pulverized into dust. He reached for the release buckle, his fingers trembling and numb. It took 3 tries to undo the latch. He fell hard, landing on the ceiling of the cockpit, groaning as the movement sent fresh spikes of pain through his body. He had to move. The fire would reach the fuel cells soon, kicking the fractured glass until it gave way. Elias crawled out into the humid air of Zalari Prime. The heat hit him instantly, a suffocating blanket of moisture and alien pollen. He dragged himself away from the wreckage, his boots scraping through violet moss and black soil. He made it perhaps 20 yards before his strength failed him. He collapsed against the root of a towering tree, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. His hand went to his sidearm, a reflex born of a decade of service. But the holster was empty. He was alone, unarmed, and bleeding out on a hostile world where humanity was considered a plague. Elias closed his eyes, listening to the jungle. It sounded alive in a way Earth never did. There were chittering sounds, deep guttural calls, and the rustle of things moving in the canopy. Then he heard a sound that did not belong to the jungle. It was the soft, rhythmic crunch of boots on soil. Elias forced his eyes open. His vision swam, doubling the image of the figure approaching him. At first, he thought it was a hallucination. The figure was tall, lithe, and armored in plates of iridescent material that shifted color from midnight blue to deep purple. A helmet obscured the face, but the stance was unmistakable. It was a warrior. The figure stopped 10 feet away. A weapon was raised, a sleek, curved rifle that hummed with contained energy. Elias tried to chuckle, but it came out as a wet cough. If this was the end, at least he would die on his feet, or he would have, if he could stand. Instead, he slumped against the tree and stared down the barrel of the gun. "Do it," he mouthed, though no sound came out. The warrior tilted their head, the weapon lowered slightly. With a hiss of pressurized gas, the helmet unsealed and was pulled free. Elias stared. She was terrifying. She was magnificent. Her skin was a pale, luminescent lavender, contrasting sharply with the dark armor. Her hair was a cascade of silver braided tightly against her skull. But it was her eyes that held him. They were solid gold, lacking pupils, burning with a fierce, predatory intelligence. And then there were the scars. 3 jagged lines ran from her cheekbone down to her jaw, interrupting the perfect symmetry of her face. They were old, white against the lavender skin, marks of violence that she wore like a crown. Princess Sayalari Vex looked down at the broken thing at her feet. She had been patrolling the borderlands, a self-imposed exile to escape the suffocating politics of the imperial palace. When she saw the smoke trail, she had expected a rogue drone or a meteor. She had not expected this. A human. The species was spoken of with revulsion in the great halls of her father, Emperor Thaxion. They were called primitives, warmongers, soft-fleshed creatures who polluted the stars. By law, she should put a plasma bolt through his skull and burn the body. It was her duty. She stepped closer, the moss dampening her footsteps. The human was in bad shape. His flight suit was torn, revealing pale skin stained with red blood. He looked fragile, like a creature that had no business existing in a universe this harsh. Yet, as she looked into his eyes, she saw no fear. She saw defiance. Sayalari knelt, her movements fluid and silent. She reached out, her gauntleted hand hovering over his chest. "You are far from home, human," she said. Her voice was melodic but carried a hard edge, like silk wrapped around steel. She spoke the trade tongue, though the accent was thick and archaic. Elias focused on her face. The pain was receding, replaced by a cold numbness that he knew was dangerous. Somewhere in his haze, he realized he should be begging for his life. Instead, a crooked smile touched his lips. "And you are tall," he rasped. Sayalari blinked. She had expected pleading. She had expected a warrior's death chant. She had not expected sarcasm. She holstered her rifle on her back. The law demanded his death. But Sayalari had spent the last 5 years watching her father turn the empire into a slaughterhouse in the name of purity. Every instinct she had been trained to suppress screamed at her to rebel. Saving this human would be the ultimate act of treason. The thought brought a thrill of dark satisfaction to her chest. She grabbed Elias by the harness of his flight suit and hauled him up. He groaned, his head lolling against her shoulder. He was heavier than he looked, dense with muscle. But to a Zalari royal trained in the gravity chambers of the capital, he was manageable. "Walk, or I drag you," she commanded. "We are going for a walk?" Elias slurred, his feet dragging through the dirt. "Lovely weather for it." "Silence," she hissed. She did not take him back to her skiff. That would be suicide. The onboard logs would record his biosignature. Instead, she supported his weight and led him deeper into the jungle, away from the crash site. She knew these borderlands better than the imperial cartographers. A mile east, swallowed by vines and thyme, lay the ruins of a pre-imperial temple. It was a place of ghosts, avoided by the superstitious patrols. It was perfect. The journey was a blur for Elias. He remembered the smell of ozone coming from her armor. He remembered the feeling of her arm, hard as iron, wrapped around his waist. He remembered looking up at the canopy and seeing 2 moons hanging in the twilight sky. When they finally reached the temple, the sun was setting. The structure was massive, a sprawling complex of black stone and crumbling pillars. Sayalari navigated the debris with practiced ease, bringing him into a central chamber that was sheltered from the elements. The roof had partially collapsed, allowing shafts of moonlight to illuminate the moss-covered floor. She lowered him onto a slab of stone that might have once been an altar. Elias hissed as his back made contact. "Stay," she ordered, as if speaking to a pet. "I am not going anywhere," Elias muttered, closing his eyes. Sayalari activated a small luminary orb from her belt, casting a soft blue light over the chamber. She began to strip off his flight gear, her movements efficient and clinical. She needed to assess the damage. When she peeled back the fabric of his undersuit, she winced. His side was a mess of purple bruising and lacerated skin. A rib had definitely punctured something. His breathing was too shallow, too wet. She reached into a pouch on her belt and withdrew a silver canister. Nanites. They were military grade, designed for Zalari physiology, but they could knit flesh and bone regardless of the species. It was a risk, but doing nothing was a death sentence. "This will burn," she warned, uncorking the canister. Elias opened one eye. "Good. I was feeling a bit chilly." She poured the shimmering liquid over his wound. Elias arched his back, a guttural cry tearing from his throat as the nanites invaded his system, cauterizing and stitching at the cellular level. Sayalari held him down, one hand pressing firmly on his shoulder, the other stroking his forehead in a gesture that surprised her with its tenderness. "Breathe. Human. Breathe." It took minutes for the spasms to subside. Elias lay panting, sweat soaking his hair. The immediate agony had faded to a dull throb. He looked up at her, his vision clearing for the first time since the crash. In the blue light of the orb, she looked ethereal. The scars on her face seemed to glow. He watched her as she checked the readings on her gauntlet. She was focused, intense. "Who are you?" he asked softly. "I am Princess Sayalari Vex, daughter of the Blood Throne, warden of the Northern Reach." "A princess," Elias said, a weak laugh escaping him. "Of course, I crash on a hostile alien moon and get rescued by a princess. My luck is weird." "You should be dead," Sayalari said, ignoring his amusement. "My father would have you flayed for polluting our air with your breath. Why didn't you?" Sayalari paused. She looked at the entrance of the temple, staring into the dark jungle. "Because death is easy," she said quietly, "and I am tired of easy things." She reached into her pack and pulled out a nutrient bar, breaking off a piece and holding it to his lips. "Eat. You need energy." Elias took the food. It tasted like chalk and berries, but he chewed and swallowed. As he ate, he studied her. She was removing her gauntlets, revealing hands that were long-fingered and elegant, yet calloused from weapons. She touched the scars on her face absent-mindedly. "You keep staring," she said, her tone defensive. "Humans value symmetry, do they not?" "My face is broken." Elias swallowed the last of the nutrient bar. He looked at the jagged lines that marred her lavender skin. They were brutal, violent marks, but they did not diminish her. They told a story of survival. "Not broken," he said. She looked at him, her gold eyes narrowing. "Do not lie to me. Pilot, I'm not lying." Elias shifted, wincing slightly. "On Earth, we have a saying about scars. They mean you survived something that tried to kill you." Sayalari looked away, her jaw tightening. "These were not from a battle. They were a lesson. From my father. When I refused to execute a prisoner of war." Elias fell silent. The gravity of her words hung in the air. He looked at her with a new depth of understanding. She was not just a royal. She was a prisoner in her own way. He reached out, his human hand pale and rough against her armored knee. He did not touch her, just hovered his hand there, a gesture of connection. "You are beautiful, Sayalari." The words were quiet, spoken without a hint of the sarcasm he had used earlier. Sayalari froze. She turned back to him, searching his face for mockery. She found none. There was only a raw, honest exhaustion and a look of genuine admiration. Heat rose in her cheeks, a violet flush that darkened her skin. She had been called powerful, dangerous, obedient, and rebellious. She had never been called beautiful, not with the scars, and certainly not by a creature that looked so soft and breakable. She pulled back abruptly, standing up and walking to the edge of the light. "You are delirious," she said, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. "The crash has scrambled your mind." "Maybe," Elias murmured, his eyes closing again as fatigue pulled him under. "But I am right. For the next 2 days, the ruined temple became their universe." Sayalari left only to secure the perimeter, returning with fresh water and local fruits that were safe for consumption. They fell into a rhythm. She would change his bandages and check the nanite progress. He would tell her stories. He told her about Earth, about oceans that were blue and deep, about cities that glowed at night like fields of stars, about the chaotic, messy freedom of human democracy. In turn, Sayalari spoke of the Empire. She spoke of the sterile perfection her father demanded, the great purge of the outer systems, and the loneliness of a palace filled with thousands of people but no allies. Their chemistry was a slow burn. It was in the way she rolled her eyes at his jokes but stayed close to listen. It was in the way he watched her move, tracking her grace with a pilot's eye for aerodynamics. But the nanites were failing. On the third night, Elias took a turn for the worse. The internal damage was more severe than Sayalari had realized. His liver and spleen were rupturing faster than the machines could repair them. He developed a fever that made his skin radiate heat. He thrashed on the stone altar, muttering names of people Sayalari did not know. Squadmates, perhaps, or lovers left behind. Sayalari knelt beside him, panic rising in her chest. She had no more medical supplies, and she could not call for a medevac without alerting the death squads. "Elias," she commanded, shaking his shoulder. "Stay with me." He opened his eyes, but they were glassy and unfocused. "Sayalari," he whispered, "it's getting dark." "No," she said fiercely. "You do not get to die. I did not drag you through a mile of jungle for you to die on me now." She checked his pulse. It was erratic, a fluttering bird against his ribs. His life force was leaking away. Human biology was too fragile, too stubborn. He was fading. Sayalari stood up and paced the small chamber. She was a princess of the blood. She had resources, training, and power, but none of it could save him. Except for one thing. She stopped pacing. The thought was madness. It was treason of the highest order. It was a heresy that had been scrubbed from the Imperial archives 300 years ago. The soul bond. It was an ancient Zalari ritual, predating the technological age. It was meant for life mates, a way to bind two souls together so that they could share strength, pain, and life. It required a merging of bioenergy that was permanent. It was strictly forbidden to perform it with a non-Zalari. It was considered a pollution of the bloodline. She looked at Elias. He was gasping for air now, his chest heaving. He looked small and alone in the vast darkness of the temple. If she did this, there was no going back. She would be bound to him. If he died, a part of her would die. If she died, he would shatter. But if she did nothing, he was gone. Sayalari made her choice. She stripped off her upper armor, revealing the ceremonial intricate tattoos that covered her torso, conduits for bioenergy that modern Zalari rarely used. She climbed onto the stone slab, straddling Elias's waist. He was burning with fever, his skin slick with sweat. "Elias," she whispered, leaning down until her forehead touched his. "I am going to hurt you, but I am going to save you." She took a small ceremonial dagger from her boot. With a steady hand, she sliced a shallow line across her own palm. Then, she did the same to him. The red human blood welled up, stark against her violet ichor. She pressed their palms together, interlacing their fingers. She closed her eyes and reached into the well of energy that sat at the core of every Zalari. It was a dormant power, suppressed by centuries of technological reliance. But it was there. She pulled at it, visualizing a thread of golden light. She pushed it out of her core, down her arm, and into the wound where their blood mixed. The reaction was explosive. Elias arched off the stone, a scream tearing from his throat. It was not just pain. It was an overload of sensation. Sayalari felt it too, a shockwave that rattled her teeth. She clamped her hand tighter, refusing to let go. "Look at me," she commanded, her voice echoing with a power that was not entirely physical. Elias's eyes snapped open. The pupils were dilated, blown wide with shock. Sayalari began the chant, words in the old tongue that tasted like ash and honey. She poured her life into him. She felt his broken ribs, his bleeding organs, his failing heart. And she forced her own vitality into those spaces. She commanded his cells to obey her will. She knitted him together with the sheer force of her spirit. The air in the temple grew heavy, charged with static. Loose pebbles on the floor began to float. The blue light of the orb turned a blinding gold. Elias felt as if he were being unmade. He felt a presence invade his mind, a vast, terrifying ocean of violet and gold. It was Sayalari. He could feel her fear, her defiance, and underneath it all, a desperate, raging desire for him to live. He gripped her hand back, anchoring himself to her. He drank in the energy she offered, his human body adapting, changing, surviving. With one final surge, the light flared and then collapsed. Sayalari slumped forward, collapsing onto his chest. Elias fell back, unconscious. Silence returned to the temple, but it was different now. The air hummed. Elias woke up slowly. There was no pain. That was the first thing he noticed. The agony in his side was gone. The throbbing in his leg had vanished. He felt electric. He opened his eyes. The temple was bright with morning sunlight filtering through the vines. He sat up, expecting stiffness, but his body moved with a fluidity that felt foreign. He looked at his hands. They looked the same, but under the skin, he could feel a low, rhythmic thrumming. He looked to his side. Sayalari was sitting on a fallen pillar a few feet away, watching him. She looked exhausted. Her skin was paler than usual, and there were dark circles under her gold eyes. But she was watching him with an intensity that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. And then, he felt it. It was not a sound. It was a sensation in the center of his chest. A second heartbeat. It was slower than his, deeper, but it beat in perfect syncopated rhythm with his own. He could feel an emotion that wasn't his, a mixture of relief and wariness. He looked at Sayalari. The emotion spiked in his chest as she shifted. Elias pressed a hand to his heart. "What? What is this?" He stood up. He felt her presence in his mind, like a hum in the background of a radio. He knew, instinctively, that she was thirsty. He knew she was worried about a patrol ship scanning the sector. He knew she was looking at his lips. He stumbled back, overwhelmed. "Get out of my head," he whispered. "I cannot," Sayalari said. Her voice was raspy. Elias looked at her, panic rising. "What did you do to me? I remember pain. I remember you on top of me. I remember light. I healed you," she said simply. "But the nanites were gone. I had to use other methods." Elias walked toward her. He felt the magnetic pull between them. It was physical. The closer he got, the more right the world felt. When he stopped in front of her, the hum in his blood settled into a purr. He looked at his palm. There was a thin white scar where she had cut him. He looked at her hand and saw the matching mark. "What is this?" he asked again, his voice demanding. Sayalari stood up. She was tall, imposing, but for the first time she looked vulnerable. She reached out and touched his cheek. Elias felt the touch not just on his skin, but in his soul. It shivered through him, terrifying and intoxicating. "I shared my life force with you, Elias. It was the only way to stitch your internal wounds before you bled out." She paused, her golden eyes searching for him. "I took you as my mate," she said, the words heavy with consequence. Elias stared at her. "Mate? Like married? Deeper," she corrected. "We are bound. Your pain is my pain. Your life is my life. If I die, you will likely die. If you die, I will be shattered." She stepped back, severing the contact. The loss of her touch felt like a physical blow to Elias. "And now," she continued, her voice turning hard, "the Empire would kill you for it, not just because you are human, but because you are proof that their laws of purity are a lie." She turned to the temple entrance, checking the weapon on her hip. "We have to move. Elias, you are no longer just a pilot. You are a walking act of treason." Elias stood there, processing the impossible. He was stranded on an alien world, hunted by an intergalactic empire, and his soul was now welded to a warrior princess who terrified him as much as she fascinated him. He felt her anxiety spike in his chest. She was waiting for him to run, to scream, to reject her. Instead, Elias felt a strange calm settle over him. He looked at the back of her armor, at the silver braid of her hair. He felt the second heartbeat thumping against his ribs. He wasn't alone. For the first time in his life, he was truly, completely not alone. He walked up beside her and looked out into the jungle. "So," he said, his voice steady, "where do we go for the honeymoon?" Sayalari looked at him, a flicker of surprise breaking her stoic mask. Then, a small, dangerous smile curved her lips. "To war? Elias, we go to war." The outpost sat on the edge of the Devil's Spine, a jagged mountain range that cut through the southern hemisphere of Zilari Prime. It was a relic of the mercenary wars, a rusted husk of black iron and reinforced polymers half buried in the violet shale. It smelled of ozone, stale air, and the metallic tang of dried blood. To Commander Elias Rourke, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, simply because it had a locking door and a roof that did not leak. Sayalari Vex stood by the airlock, her silhouette framed by the harsh dying light of the red sun setting outside. She had cleaned the mud from her armor, and the iridescent plates shone with a dull, predatory gleam. "I must go," she said. Her voice was tight, strained. Elias sat on a crate of old ammunition, nursing a packet of nutrient paste she had scavenged. The bond between them hummed in his chest, a physical vibration that felt like a second sternum vibrating against his ribs. He could feel her anxiety. It tasted like copper in the back of his throat. You are going back to the viper's nest, Elias said. He tried to sound casual, but the connection betrayed him. He felt her register his fear. The palace is my home. Elias, she corrected, though the word felt hollow even to her. I have to show my face. If I disappear for too long, my father will send the Imperial Guard to turn over every rock in this hemisphere. I need to convince them I was just hunting a rogue beast. She stepped closer. The air between them crackled. Since the ritual in the temple, proximity has become a dangerous drug. Being close to her made his senses sharpen. Colors were brighter, sounds crisp. Being apart felt like being slowly suffocated. Do not leave this outpost, she commanded. The sensors are scrambled, so they cannot scan you from orbit. But if you step outside, the thermal satellites will pick you up in 10 seconds. I will be a good little prisoner, Elias promised. Sayalari looked at him, her golden eyes softening for a fraction of a second. She reached out, her fingers brushing his jaw. A spark, visible and blue, jumped between their skin. Elias inhaled sharply. The sensation was not just a static shock, it was a rush of endorphins, a sudden spike of her affection crashing into his nervous system. Stay alive, human, she whispered. Then she was gone. The airlock hissed shut, sealing with a heavy thud. Elias was alone. The Imperial Palace was a monstrosity of white marble and floating gravity spires, suspended above the capital city like a judgment waiting to fall. Sayalari walked the Hall of Ancestors, her boots clicking rhythmically on the polished floor. She kept her mental shields up, a discipline she had learned as a child. She had to visualize a wall of ice around her mind, dampening the radiant heat of the soul bond. If any of the court telepaths sensed the second life force tethered to hers, she would be executed before sunset. She entered the throne room. It was a cavernous space, dominated by the massive obsidian chair where Emperor Thaxion Vex sat. He was ancient, his skin the color of bleached bone, his scars numerous and proud. He did not look up from the datapad he was studying as Sayalari knelt. You have been absent, daughter, Thaxion said. His voice was like grinding stones. I was tracking a disturbance in the borderlands, Sayalari lied smoothly. A smuggler skiff. It crashed in the jungle. No survivors. Thaxion finally looked at her. His eyes were the same gold as hers, but cold, devoid of the fire that burned in Sayalari. He stood up, his height imposing, draped in robes of crimson silk. Smugglers, he scoffed. Parasites. They infest our world like humans infest the galaxy. Sayalari felt a spike of anger, hot and sudden, immediately. She felt a distant echo of confusion from Elias, miles away in the outpost. She clamped down on the emotion, reinforcing her mental wall. They are a plague, Thaxion continued, walking down the steps of the dais. He stopped in front of a holographic display of the galaxy. He gestured to the sector where Earth was located. Weak, short-lived. They breed in the dirt and think themselves kings because they learned to split an atom. Purity. Sayalari. That is the only truth. We are the apex. We do not mix with the mud. Sayalari remembered being a child, standing in this very room. She had watched her father execute a diplomat from the aquatic hegemony simply because the creature had dripped water onto the sacred floor. Thaxion did not just believe in Zalari's superiority, he breathed it. To him, other species were not even enemies. They were livestock. I understand, father, she said, her voice flat. Thaxion turned to her, his gaze piercing. Do you? You have always been soft, like your mother. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. Sayalari fought the urge to step back. She fought the urge to draw the dagger at her waist. General Kale reports an energy anomaly in the northern quadrant. Thaxian said softly. A resonance spike. The kind we have not seen since the old rituals. Silari's heart hammered against her ribs. She forced her face to remain stone. Old equipment malfunctions. Father, the sensors are ancient. Perhaps, Thaxian murmured. But I do not take chances with purity. I have authorized the deployment of the Shadow Guild, bounty hunters. They are to sweep the sector. They are looking for a foreign male. Sayalari felt the blood drain from her face. A foreign male, she asked. Thaxian smiled, a thin, cruel stretching of his lips. The seers believe something, unclean, has happened. If there is a beast in my garden, Sayalari, I will find it, and I will skin it. 3 days passed in the outpost. For Elias, they were a study in boredom and terror. He had explored every inch of the station. It was built for creatures 7 feet tall, meaning he had to stand on his toes to reach the control panels. The air recyclers hummed with a rhythmic thumping that sounded like a headache waiting to happen. He was also filthy. The crash, the jungle trek, and the days of hiding had left him coated in a layer of grime, dried blood, and alien pollen. He needed to get clean. He found a room labeled with a symbol that looked like a drop of water. Inside, there was no showerhead, no faucet, just a metal grid on the floor and a control panel with ominous red buttons. Elias stood in the center of the grid. Okay, he muttered. Space shower. How hard can it be? He pressed the largest button. There was no water. Instead, high-frequency sonic emitters in the walls shrieked to life. Elias yelled as the sound waves hit him physically, vibrating the dirt off his skin with the force of a sandblaster. It felt like being scrubbed with steel wool by an angry vibration. He scrambled for the door, but the safety locks had engaged. He endured 2 minutes of sonic exfoliation before the cycle ended. The door hissed open. Elias stumbled out, red as a lobster, his skin tingling violently, but undeniably clean. He looked at his reflection in a polished metal panel. He looked raw. Great, he muttered. I survived a crash landing just to be vibrated to death by a bathroom. He found a locker with old mercenary fatigues. They were huge on him, but he managed to belt the trousers and roll the sleeves of the tunic. He looked ridiculous, like a child playing dress-up in a giant's clothes, but it was better than his torn flight suit. He sat on the bunk, staring at the ceiling. The bond was quiet. He could feel Sayalari was distant, her emotions shielded. It worried him. He tried to push a thought to her, I am okay, but it felt like shouting into a fog. He fell asleep with his hand over his chest, listening to the dual rhythm of their hearts. He woke to the sound of the airlock cycling. Elias sat up, reaching for a metal bar he had scavenged as a weapon. But the figure that stepped through the inner door was not a bounty hunter. Sayalari looked exhausted. She had shed her heavy armor, wearing only a bodysuit of dark, flexible fabric that clung to her muscular frame. She carried a bag of supplies. You look terrible, Elias said, lowering the bar. And you look red, Sayalari replied, eyeing his scrubbed skin. I found the sonic chamber, Elias admitted. We need to talk about your people's definition of bathing. I think I lost 3 layers of dermis. A small smile touched her lips, the first real one he had seen in days. It is designed for chitinous armor. Elias, not soft human skin. She set the bag down and walked toward him. The moment she crossed the room, the fog in his head cleared. The bond flared to life, singing with relief. It was a physical sensation of weight being lifted. Sayalari stopped inches from him. She didn't touch him, but the air between them grew heavy. My father knows, she said quietly. Not everything, but he suspects. He has sent hunters. Elias felt a cold knot in his stomach. How long do we have? I do not know. Days. Maybe less. She sat on the edge of the bunk beside him. The mattress dipped under her weight. She smelled of exotic spices and cold wind. Elias looked at the scars on her face. He wanted to trace them. The impulse was so strong his hand twitched. Why did you come back tonight? He asked. It's dangerous. Because I could not sleep. Sayalari confessed. The distance, it hurts. She turned to look at him. Her golden eyes scanned his face, lingering on his mouth. Do you feel it? She asked. The pull? It's like gravity, Elias whispered. Sayalari reached out and took his hand. This time, she did not pull away when the static sparked. She let it run through them. She laced her fingers with his. Your biology is so strange, she murmured, her voice dropping an octave. You are so fragile. No natural armor, no claws. Your heart beats so fast, like a frightened bird. And yet... She leaned in closer. And yet you are the only thing that makes me feel quiet. Elias's breath hitched. The soul bond was amplifying everything. He could feel her desire radiating off her like heat from a furnace. It wasn't just physical lust, it was a deep, aching need for closeness, for unity. It was terrifyingly intimate. Sayalari, he warned, his voice rough. If we do this... Shut up, pilot, she whispered. She closed the distance. The kiss was not tentative. It was a collision. When her lips touched his, the world exploded. It wasn't just a kiss. Through the bond, Elias felt her sensation of it. He felt the roughness of his own stubble against her smooth skin. He felt the taste of her mouth, which was sweet and metallic. He felt the sheer, overwhelming power of her muscles coiling against him. He pulled her closer, his hands tangling in her silver braid. Sayalari made a sound deep in her throat, a growl that vibrated into his chest. She pushed him back onto the bunk, straddling him with a predatory grace. The encounter was a blur of sensation. It was clumsy and desperate and sacred. Clothes were discarded in a frenzy. When skin touched skin, the bioluminescent energy of the bond flared, casting dancing shadows on the metal walls. Elias felt as if he were dissolving into her. He could see flashes of her memories, flying over crystal canyons, the cold anger of her father, the loneliness of her chambers. And he knew she was seeing him. The blue sky of Earth, the smell of rain, the fear of the crash. It was surreal. He could feel her pleasure as if it were his own, creating a feedback loop that was nearly too intense to endure. It was a union that transcended biology. They were not two species anymore. They were one entity, breathing in sync, moving in sync, burning in the dark of a forgotten moon. Afterward, the silence was absolute. They lay tangled together, limbs heavy and intertwined. Sayalari's head rested on his chest. The golden light of the bond had settled into a soft, rhythmic pulse beneath their skin. Elias ran a hand down her back, tracing the line of her spine. He felt a profound sense of peace he had never known. You are stuck with me now, princess, he whispered into the darkness. Sayalari shifted, pressing a kiss to his sternum. A terrible fate, she murmured sleepily. To be bound to a man who cannot even survive a shower. Elias laughed, the sound vibrating through them both. For an hour, the universe was perfect. They drifted in the space between sleep and wakefulness, protected by the walls of the outpost and the warmth of the bond. Then, the roof exploded. There was no warning. 1 second, there was silence. The next, the metal ceiling buckled inward with a deafening screech of tearing alloy. Debris rained down, chunks of insulation, twisted steel, and glass. Sayalari moved before Elias even registered the noise. She rolled, shoving him off the bunk and under the heavy metal table bolted to the floor. She was naked, unarmed, and moving with the speed of a striking viper. A figure dropped through the hole in the roof. It landed in a crouch, silent despite the impact. It was cloaked in shimmer weave, a fabric that bent light, making it look like a hole in reality, a shadow stalker. Elias scrambled for his metal bar, his heart slamming against his ribs. The piece was gone, replaced by a jagged spike of adrenaline. The assassin moved. It didn't walk. It flowed. A blade, glowing with green plasma, materialized in its hand. It lunged for Sayalari. Sayalari sidestepped, grabbing a heavy canister of water and swinging it. The canister connected with the assassin's head, shattering with a wet crunch, but the figure barely staggered. It spun, the plasma blade hissing through the air. Elias saw the opening. He roared, charging from under the table, swinging the metal pipe with everything he had. He connected with the assassin's midsection. It felt like hitting a brick wall. The assassin turned its faceless cowl toward him. With a dismissive backhand, it struck Elias. The blow sent him flying across the room. He slammed into the control panel, sliding to the floor. He gasped, trying to inhale, but his lungs were paralyzed. The assassin turned back to Sayalari, but then paused. It looked at Elias. It raised the plasma blade, preparing to throw. "No!" Sayalari screamed. She launched herself across the room, but she was too far away. The assassin threw the blade. Elias tried to move, but his body wouldn't obey. He saw the green light spinning toward him when he twisted at the last second. The blade missed his heart but buried itself deep in his thigh. The pain was blinding. It wasn't just a cut. The plasma cauterized and boiled the flesh instantly. Elias screamed, a sound that tore at his throat. The sound of his pain hit Sayalari through the bond like a physical blow. She stumbled, clutching her chest, her eyes going wide. But the pain did not stop her. It fueled her. Her eyes began to glow, not just gold, but white-hot. The tattoos on her body flared. She let out a shriek that shattered the remaining glass in the room. She did not look for a weapon. She became one. She closed the distance to the assassin in a blur of motion that the human eye could not track. The assassin tried to draw a second blade, but Sayalari grabbed its wrist. There was a sickening crack as she snapped the bone. She didn't stop. She drove her knee into the figure's chest, caving in the armor plates. She threw the assassin to the floor. Before it could rise, she was on top of it. She ripped the helmet off, revealing an insectoid face with mandibles clicking in terror. Sayalari grabbed the creature's head with both hands. With a single brutal twist, she severed its spine. The assassin went limp. Sayalari stood up, her chest heaving, her body glowing in the dark room. She looked like a goddess of vengeance, terrifying and magnificent. She turned to Elias. The glow faded as she rushed to him. She fell to her knees, her hands hovering over the plasma dagger sticking out of his leg. "Do not pull it out," Elias gasped, his teeth clenched so hard he thought they would crack. "I know," she said, her voice shaking. She ripped a strip of fabric from the assassin's cloak and tied a tourniquet above the wound. Elias looked at the dead creature. That was not a bounty hunter. That was Imperial Special Ops. Sayalari finished tying the knot and looked at him. Her face was smeared with dust and alien blood. Her eyes were hard, the golden fire burning colder now. She looked at the hole in the roof, where the stars of the Empire shone down, cold and indifferent. "You are right," she said. She helped Elias stand, supporting his weight as he groaned. She looked into his eyes, and he felt the steel resolve hardening in her mind. "This changes everything," she said, "low and dangerous. They are not trying to capture a fugitive anymore. They sent an executioner." She looked back at the corpse, then at the open sky. "They are no longer just hunting a human," she said. "They are hunting us." The jungle of Zilari Prime was not a place of peace. It was a biological engine of consumption. Vines as thick as a man's thigh coiled around trees that scraped the stratosphere, and the air was so humid it felt like breathing through a wet wool blanket. Commander Elias Rourke stumbled, his boot catching on a protruding root. He went down hard, mud splashing up to coat his visor. A sharp, white-hot lance of pain shot up his left leg, radiating from the cauterized plasma wound the assassin had left him with. He gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out. The sound was death out here. A hand, strong and encased in violet-tinted gauntlets, grabbed the back of his combat vest and hauled him upright. "Move, human!" Sayalari Vex hissed. Her helmet was gone, lost miles back in the ravine, and her silver hair was plastered to her skull by the relentless rain. Her golden eyes scanned the canopy above, searching for the telltale shimmer of heat-seeking drones. "I am moving," Elias gasped, favoring his good leg. "I just wanted to inspect the mud. Very high-quality dirt you have here." "Save your breath," she commanded, though he felt a flicker of amusement ripple through the bond in his chest. It was a strange sensation, like a phantom laugh echoing in his own ribcage. They had been running for 3 days. The assassination attempt at the outpost had changed the game. They were no longer just hiding. They were being hunted like sport. The Empire had deployed seekers, autonomous drones the size of hawks, equipped with thermal scanners and nerve toxin darts. Twice. They had been forced to dive into stagnant swamps to mask their heat signatures. "Where are we going?" "Sayalari?" Elias asked, wiping rain from his eyes. "We have been walking in circles." "Not circles," she corrected, pushing aside a massive fern frond. "Spirals. We are heading for the jagged peaks of the Silent Ridge. There is a place there. An archive." "An archive?" Elias asked, limping after her. "We are being chased by murder bots and your plan is to go to a library?" "It is not a library," Sayalari said, her voice tight. "It is a repository of the First Era, before the Empire, before the purity laws. My people were explorers. We valued knowledge over conquest. That archive is run by an AI from that time. It knows the old ways. It knows about the bond." Elias stopped. The rain hammered against his shoulders. The bond. The thing that tied his life to hers. "You think it can break it?" he asked quietly. Sayalari stopped too. She did not turn around. Her shoulders, encased in battered armor, rose and fell with a heavy sigh. "I think it might be the only way to save you," she said. "If we can sever the connection, I can surrender myself. I can claim I kidnapped you. You could be returned to Earth." "And what happens to you?" Elias asked. Sayalari turned then. Her face was streaked with grime, the scars standing out in stark relief. "That does not matter. It matters to me," Elias said. The sound of a high-pitched whine cut through the air. "Drone!" Sayalari barked. She tackled him. They hit the mud together, sliding down a steep embankment into a tangle of roots. Sayalari pressed him into the dirt, covering his body with hers. The bond flared with her tension, a sharp, electric spike of adrenaline. Above them, through the gaps in the leaves, Elias saw a sleek black shape drift by. A red laser grid swept the forest floor, inches from where they lay. They held their breath. The drone hovered, its turbines whining, before banking left and disappearing over the ridge. Sayalari exhaled, her forehead resting against his chest. "Safe. For now." Elias looked up at her. The proximity was intoxicating. Even covered in mud, hunted and exhausted, the pull toward her was magnetic. "You are heavy, princess," he whispered, "and you are soft." "Pilot," she retorted, but she did not move. They lay there for a long moment, listening to the rain. "Why?" Elias asked suddenly. "Why what? Why save me?" "Back at the crash site, you could have walked away. You could have put a bolt in my head and been the hero of the Empire. Why drag a broken human through hell?" Sayalari rolled off him and sat up, wiping her hands on her greaves. She looked at the trees, her expression distant. "Freedom," she said. Elias sat up, wincing as his leg throbbed. "Freedom? You are the daughter of the Emperor. You have more freedom than anyone on this planet." "No," Sayalari said, her voice bitter. "I have privilege. That is not freedom. My father's empire is a cage built of gold and bones. Every breath I take is dictated by protocol. Who I speak to, what I wear, who I kill." She looked at him. "When I saw you in the wreckage, you looked defiant. You were dying, but you were not afraid. You were fighting gravity itself. I suppose I wanted to know what that felt like, to choose something that was not chosen for me." Elias studied her. He saw the loneliness behind the warrior's mask. "On Earth," he said softly, "we talk a lot about freedom, usually while we are taking it away from someone else. But my grandfather used to say that freedom is just the ability to say no when everyone else expects you to say yes." Sayalari nodded slowly. "Then I suppose saving you was my no." They camped that night on the outskirts of a small settlement clinging to the cliffs of the Silent Ridge. It was a village of the outcast castes, miners and laborers who were considered too low status to live in the capital cities. The buildings were carved directly into the rock, lit by hanging lanterns of phosphorescent moss. "We need food," Sayalari said, pulling her cloak tight to hide her armor and her face. "And you need a real bandage for that leg." They entered the village cautiously. The Zalari here were smaller, their skin duller than Sayalari's radiant lavender. They moved with heads bowed, beaten down by generations of servitude. They found a small tavern, a hole in the wall smelling of roasted fungus and strong spirits. Sayalari sat in the darkest corner, keeping her head down. Elias, however, drew stares. Humans were a myth to these people, a monster story told to frighten children. A group of young Zalari, children no taller than Elias's waist, gathered near their table. They stared at him with wide, multifaceted eyes. They did not look hostile, just intensely curious. Elias smiled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal washer from his flight suit. "Watch this," he said in broken trade tongue. He performed a simple sleight of hand trick, making the washer disappear and reappear behind his ear. It was a trick that never failed to delight human children. The Zalari children blinked in unison. They did not clap. They did not gasp. One of them pointed a slender finger. "It is in your sleeve," the child said flatly. "We can see the heat signature of the metal moving up your arm." Elias froze. "Right. Different visual spectrum." "Tough crowd." He tried again, attempting a shadow puppet on the wall. "That is a hand." The child critiqued. "It does not look like an animal. It looks like a hand making a cramp." Sayalari snorted into her drink. The bond vibrated with her amusement. "You are embarrassing yourself. Human," she murmured mentally. Elias frowned. He looked at the children. They were waiting, unimpressed. He realized that visual tricks were useless against a species with superior optics. He needed something else, something that didn't rely on sight. He began to tap a rhythm on the wooden table, a slow, steady beat. Then, He started to hum. The tavern went quiet. Elias closed his eyes and began to sing. It wasn't a martial song or a pop tune. It was an old folk song from the American Appalachians, a song about mountains and lost loves. His voice was rough, gravelly from smoke and exhaustion, but it carried a raw, haunting melody that transcended language. Wayfaring stranger. Traveling through this world of woe, the effect was immediate. The Zalari children's eyes widened, their pupils dilating. The miners at the bar stopped drinking. The bartender paused while wiping a glass. Zalari culture was visual. Their art was sculpture, light weaving, and architecture. They had rhythm, but they did not have melody in the way humans did. To them, the variation of pitch and tone, the emotional resonance of the human voice, was something entirely alien. It was hypnotic. Elias finished the verse and opened his eyes. The tavern was silent. The children were leaning forward, their mouths slightly open. "Do it again," the skeptical child whispered. "Please." Elias smiled, a genuine, tired smile. Sailari watched him from the shadows of her hood. She had seen him fight. She had seen him bleed. She had seen him be sarcastic and stubborn. But she had never seen this. She watched the way the light from the moss lanterns caught the stubble on his jaw. She felt the vibration of his voice not just in her ears, but through the bond, resonating in her own marrow. It was a sensation of warmth, of safety, of profound beauty. He was not a pet. He was not a project. He was a soul. And he was beautiful. Her heart softened, the ice she had built around it melting faster than she could stop it. She realized, with a jolt of terror, that she would burn the entire galaxy to keep hearing him sing. They left the village an hour later, their packs full of dried meat and clean bandages. The climb up the silent ridge was brutal, but the view at the top was worth the agony. They stood on the edge of a vast plateau. Before them lay the bioluminescent forest of Korra. It was a sea of light. The trees here were translucent, filled with pulsing sap that glowed neon blue, violet, and soft pink. The ground was carpeted in glowing moss that rippled like water when the wind blew. "It's unbelievable," Elias breathed. "It is the lungs of the world," Sayalari said softly. They walked into the light. It was like walking inside a living dream. The air was sweet, smelling of ozone and nectar. The light cast no shadows, illuminating everything in a soft, ethereal glow. They stopped by a pool of water that shone like liquid silver. Sayalari sat on a flat rock, pulling her knees to her chest. The beauty of the place seemed to drain the fight out of her. She looked small against the grandeur of the glowing trees. Elias sat beside her. He could feel her mood shift through the bond, a sudden crushing weight of despair. "What is it?" he asked gently. Sayalari looked at the water. "We are fooling ourselves. Elias, there is no escape. My father has fleets. He has millions of soldiers. We are two people walking into a dead end." She turned to him, tears shimmering in her golden eyes. "I have destroyed your life. You should have died in the crash. It would have been cleaner. Now, you will die screaming in a torture cell because of my selfishness." Elias reached out and took her face in his hands. Her skin was cool, but the bond flared hot at his touch. "Hey," he said firmly, "look at me." She met his gaze. "I was dead when I hit the ground, Sayalari. You gave me extra time. Every second I have had since that crash is a gift you gave me." He brushed his thumb over the scar on her cheek. "I am not afraid of dying," he said. "I am afraid of not living before I do." Sayalari's breath hitched. "What are you saying?" Elias leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. I am saying the Empire is tomorrow's problem. The bounty hunters are tomorrow's problem. Right now, we are here, in the most beautiful place in the universe. And I am with the woman who saved my soul. He kissed her. It was different from the desperate, adrenaline-fueled encounter in the outpost. This was slow. It was deliberate. It was a conversation without words. Sailari made a soft sound and melted into him. The doubts, the fear, the political weight of her station, it all evaporated. There was only the heat of his skin, the roughness of his hands, and the overwhelming, blinding light of the bond. As they lay back onto the bed of glowing moss, the forest seemed to react to them. The trees pulsed brighter, synchronizing with the rhythm of their joined heartbeats. The bioenergy of the bond spilled out, merging with the ambient light of the forest until there was no boundary between them and the world. Sailari touched his chest, marveling at the fragility and strength of him. Then let us live, she whispered against his lips, like there is no future. They made love surrounded by alien light, two fugitives rewriting the laws of their universe with every touch. For a few hours, the war did not exist. There were only them. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the cold, gray light of reality. They reached the archive at noon. It was a massive structure embedded in the side of the mountain, a smooth, featureless wall of obsidian. Sailari placed her hand on the surface. The stone rippled, reading her genetic markers. Blood of the first line recognized. A mechanical voice boomed, "Welcome, daughter of Vex." The wall dissolved into mist. They stepped through. The interior was a cathedral of data. Columns of crystal stretched up into the darkness, pulsing with faint blue light. The air was sterile and cold. "Show us the Keeper," Sailari commanded. A hologram materialized in the center of the room. It was not a person but a geometric shape, a shifting, rotating tesseract of light. "I am the Keeper," the entity said. Its voice sounded like wind blowing through glass. "It has been 300 cycles since a royal visited this place." "We need answers," Sailari said, stepping forward. She pulled Elias with her. "We are bound. The soul ritual. We need to know how to serve it." The tesseract spun faster, scanning them. A beam of light swept over Elias. Then Sailari. "Interesting," the Keeper hummed. "A cross-species integration. Rare. Dangerous." "Can you break it?" Elias asked. The Keeper paused. Its rotation slowed. "You misunderstand the nature of the ritual. Human. The soul bond is not a surgical connection. It is a quantum entanglement of consciousness." The hologram expanded, showing a diagram of two DNA helices twisting together until they became indistinguishable. When the energy was transferred, you did not just share life force. You shared fate. The universe now perceives you as a single coordinate. To sever the bond is to sever the thread of existence for both subjects. Sailari went pale. "You mean, if we break it, you both die?" The Keeper finished. "Instantly. There is no reversal. The knot is tied until the cessation of biological function." Elias felt a cold pit open in his stomach. "So we are stuck. It is more than that," the Keeper continued. "The bond creates a resonance. It is growing. Soon, you will not just share emotions. You will share skills, memories, pain. You are becoming a dyad, a binary star system in a universe of single suns." Sailari slumped against a console. "Then it was all for nothing. We came here for a cure, and we found a death sentence." The Keeper's light shifted to red, alert, priority transmission intercepted on the Imperial frequency. A large screen on the wall flickered to life. The face of Emperor Thaxion filled the room. He looked deranged, his eyes wide with a fanatical fury. "Citizens of the Empire." Thaxion roared, his voice distorted by the recording. A great sickness has been discovered, a treason of the blood. My daughter has been corrupted by a foreign parasite. Elias stepped closer to the screen, his fists clenching. To ensure the purity of our world, the Emperor continued, I hereby issue the Edict of Cleansing. All non-Zalari life forms within the planetary borders are declared contraband. The image switched to scenes of horror. Imperial death squads dragging aliens of various species, traders, refugees, workers out of their homes. Executions in the streets, cities burning, no exemption. Thaxion screamed, surrender the human, Sayalari, or watch the galaxy burn. Every drop of alien blood spilled is on your hands. Return him to the capital for execution, and the purging stops. You have one rotation. The screen went black. The silence in the archive was deafening. Sayalari dropped to her knees, her hands covered her face and her shoulders shook. No, she sobbed. It was a horrible, broken sound, not them. They are innocent. He is killing them all just to get to you. She looked up at Elias, tears streaming down her face. The warrior was gone. In her place was a woman crushed by the weight of her own choices. I have to take you back, she whispered. I have to surrender you. I cannot let them die. Elias, I cannot be the reason for a genocide. Elias looked at the black screen. He saw the fire. He saw death. He felt Sayalari's agony ripping through his own heart. He knelt in front of her. He took her hands, pulling them away from her face. Sayalari, he said. His voice was low. Dangerous. When we went back, she cried. We beg for mercy. There is no mercy, Elias shouted, his voice echoing off the crystal pillars. Do you think he will stop? If you give me up, he kills me. And then he kills you for treason. And then he keeps killing because that is what tyrants do. You cannot feed a beast enough meat to make it vegetarian. He stood up, pulling her with him. He gripped her shoulders, shaking her slightly. He wants a monster? Elias said, his eyes hard. He wants a war? Sayalari looked at him, trembling. What can we do? We are two people against an empire. Elias looked at the ancient machines around them. He looked at the tesseract spinning in the air. We are not just two people, he said. The keeper said we are a dyad. We share skills. We share memories. He turned to the AI. Keeper, does this archive contain the tactical schematics of the capital city? The defense grids? The shield frequencies? The keeper spun. Affirmative. The data is historical, but the foundational architecture remains unchanged. Elias turned back to Sayalari. A grim smile touched his lips. You know how to fly a warship. I know how to infiltrate enemy territory. You have the royal codes. I have the tactical improvisation of a species that has been fighting wars since we figured out how to sharpen sticks. He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. We don't surrender. Sayalari, we don't beg. He looked at the map of the capital displayed on the console. Then we stop running, Elias said, and we started hunting. The theft of the Star Sovereign was less of a heist and more of a calculated desecration of imperial property. The personal shuttle of the High Archon sat on the private landing pad of the Archive District, a sleek teardrop of silver alloy and anti-gravity engines. It was guarded by 2 sentries who were currently unconscious, dragged into the shadows of the ferns by a human pilot who was learning that alien nerve pinches were surprisingly similar to the ones he had learned in basic training. Sayalari Vex stood by the airlock, her hands moving in a blur over the encryption pad. The rain of the silent ridge had stopped, leaving the air thick with mist. You have 10 seconds, Princess Elias whispered, keeping low behind a crate of fuel cells. I can see the heat signatures of a patrol coming up the funicular. I do not need 10, Sayalari muttered, the golden light of the interface reflecting in her eyes. I wrote the base code for this class of ship when I was 12. It is insulting that they have not updated the firewall. With a soft chime, the airlock hissed open. Get in, she commanded. They scrambled aboard. The interior of the Star Sovereign was a sharp contrast to the muddy, dangerous world they left behind. It smelled of sterile lemon and expensive leather. The deck plates were polished to a mirror sheen. Elias felt filthy just standing there, his boots leaving streaks of mud on the pristine white floor. Sayalari didn't hesitate. She threw herself into the pilot's seat, her fingers dancing across the holographic controls. The engines hummed to life, a sound not like a combustion roar, but a harmonic vibration that rattled Elias's teeth. Buckle up, pilot, she called out. We are leaving the atmosphere at an aggressive angle. Elias strapped himself into the co-pilot chair just as the G-force hit. The ship shot upward, punching through the cloud layer with violent speed. The sky turned from gray to blue to the infinite black of space in a matter of heartbeats. Sayalari engaged the cloaking drive immediately. The stars outside the viewport shimmered and vanished as the ship bent light around its hull, rendering them invisible to the armada of destroyers orbiting the planet below. We were clear. Sayalari exhaled, leaning back. She looked at Elias. Her face was pale, the strain of the last few days etching deep lines around her mouth, but her eyes were burning with a terrifying resolve. Next stop, the Lion's Den, Elias said, looking at the navigation map. The capital satellite. It was a massive construct, a moon-sized artificial world of metal and light that orbited Zalari Prime. It was the seat of the Senate, the home of the aristocracy, and the place where Emperor Thaxion held court. It was the heart of the beast. To get in, Sayalari said, unbuckling her harness. We need to stop looking like fugitives and start looking like gods. The preparations took place in the stateroom at the rear of the ship. It was a lavish space, filled with silk tapestries and a large circular mirror. Sayalari rummaged through the wardrobe, pulling out robes of heavy, shimmering velvet. You cannot wear your flight suit, she said, eyeing Elias's tattered, blood-stained uniform. And you cannot wear Zalari armor. It would mark you as a soldier. You need to look like a diplomat from the Outer Rim, someone exotic, someone rich enough to be ignored. She held up a small silver canister. Nanite weave, she explained. Stand still. Elias stood in the center of the room, feeling foolish. This is going to tickle, isn't it? It will feel like being licked by 1,000 tiny cats, Sayalari said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Arms out. She uncorked the canister and poured the liquid metal onto his shoulders. Elias shuddered. It was cold, moving with a liquid intelligence, spreading down his chest and arms. Sayalari stepped close, her hands hovering over the liquid, guiding it with magnetic pulses from her ring. Shoulders back, she instructed, tapping his spine. A diplomat does not slouch. You walk as if the ground is lucky to have you step on it. She molded the nanites, shaping them into a high-collared tunic of midnight blue with silver embroidery that mimicked the constellations of the southern sky. Her hands brushed against his neck, his chest, his waist. The contact was electric every time her fingers grazed him. The soul bond flared. It wasn't just a spark anymore, it was a continuous current. Elias watched her face as she worked. She was focused, her brow furrowed in concentration. But he could feel the tremor in her hands. He could feel the wave of desire and fear rolling off her like heat. You are shaking, he whispered. Sayalari paused, her hand resting over his heart. The nanites solidified, cooling into a fabric that felt like silk but was tough as Kevlar. I am terrified, she admitted softly, not meeting his eyes. I am taking you into a room full of people who want you dead. If I make a mistake. You won't, Elias said. He reached up and covered her hand with his. The connection deepened instantly. The room seemed to drop away. Sayalari looked up at him. The gold in her eyes swirled. We have to be careful, she whispered. The bond. It is getting stronger. If we lose focus in the Senate, if we let our emotions bleed out, they will sense it. You have to shield your mind. Elias? How? I'm not a telepath. She stepped closer, until their bodies were touching. Focus on me, she said. Not on the fear. Focus on the sound of my voice. Focus on this. She kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion, but of grounding. It was an anchor. Elias felt her mental walls wrap around his mind, a fortress of ice and iron protecting the burning sun of their shared soul. When they pulled apart, they were breathless. Okay, Elias said, his voice rough. Etiquette lesson 1. Do not kiss the diplomat in front of the emperor. Sayalari laughed, a short, sharp sound. No. That would definitely be a breach of protocol. They spent the next 4 hours in hyperspace transit, to conserve energy and prepare for the mental strain ahead. They sat together in the cockpit, drifting into a meditative sleep. But sleep with a soul bond was not rest. It was an immersion. Elias drifted, but he did not dream his own dreams. The darkness of his mind was replaced by the cold, echoing halls of the imperial palace. He was small. He was looking up at a father who towered over him, a man who looked at him not with love but with calculation. He felt the crushing weight of expectation. He felt the loneliness of a child surrounded by guards but never hugged. He felt the cold sting of a slap when he showed mercy to a wounded bird. Weakness is a disease, Sayalari. Purge it. Elias jolted in his sleep, his heart aching with a child's grief. Beside him, Sayalari twitched. She was plunged into the cockpit of a burning fighter jet. She felt the G-force crushing her chest. She heard the scream of a friend over the comms, Elias, eject, get out, followed by the static of death. She felt the survivor's guilt, a heavy black stone in her gut that never went away. She felt the longing for a home that was light years away, a blue marble she might never see again. They woke at the same instant as the nav computer chimed. They stared at each other, eyes wide, chests heaving. The boundaries between them had eroded. Elias looked at her and he didn't just see the princess. He felt the little girl who hid in the library to cry. Sayalari looked at him and felt the weight of the dog tags he carried in his pocket. We are here, Sayalari whispered, her voice trembling. Elias reached out and squeezed her hand. I've got you. Sayalari. I've got you. The capital satellite was a jewel of corruption. They docked in the VIP hangar using the stolen codes. Sayalari had donned a heavy veil and robes of a visiting cleric, obscuring her features and her scars. Elias walked beside her, the blue tunic shimmering under the artificial lights, his posture rigid and arrogant as she had taught him. The Senate chamber was a colossal amphitheater. Thousands of pods floated in the air, each containing a representative from the various provinces and subjugated worlds of the empire. The noise was a physical wall, shouting, jeering, the banging of staves. Elias looked around, keeping his face impassive. It was opulent. Gold leaf covered the walls. The air smelled of expensive incense designed to mask the scent of fear. But below the floating pods, in the shadows of the chamber floor, he saw the truth. Servants, chained together by energy links, scurried to deliver drinks and data pads. They were gaunt, their eyes hollow. He saw a guard strike a worker for moving too slowly. and not a single senator turned to look. It isn't a government. Elias projected his thoughts to Sayalari. It's a slaughterhouse with a dress code. Focus. Sayalari's voice echoed in his head. Senator Vore is in Sector 9. They navigated the crowded corridors. Senator Drex Vore was an old friend of Sayalari's mother, a scholar who had often spoken privately against the Emperor's xenophobia. If anyone could help them access the broadcast array to reveal the truth about the bond, it was him. They found him in his private viewing box. Vore was an elderly Zalari. His lavender skin faded to gray, his movements slow. He dismissed his guards when Sayalari revealed her face. Princess, Vore gasped, bowing low. We thought you were dead. The reports say you were killed by the human savage. The reports are lies, Drex, Sayalari said, lowering her veil. The human is here. Elias stepped forward. Vore's eyes widened, scanning the human from head to toe. He is civilized, Vore murmured. He is my mate, Sayalari said, dropping the bombshell with quiet defiance. We are bound, Drex. The old way. Vore collapsed into his chair. The old way? That is impossible. The biology is incompatible, unless the history books are wrong, Elias said, unless the Empire has been lying about what is possible. Sayalari knelt beside the old senator's chair. Drex, we need the codes to the main broadcast tower. We need to show the people that a union is possible. If they see that a Zalari and a human can bond, the foundation of my father's hate will crumble. Vore looked at her, his hands trembling. He looked at Elias. He looked out at the Senate floor, where the Emperor's hologram was currently screaming about the need for racial purity. It would cause a civil war. Vore whispered, chaos. The streets would run with blood. Or it would stop a genocide. Sayalari pressed. Please, for my mother. Vore closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. Then, he reached under his desk and pressed a button. I am sorry, Sayalari. The doors to the private box blew open. A squad of Imperial Praetorian guards stormed in, their shock staves crackling with red electricity. Sayalari spun, drawing a concealed blade from her robes. But there were too many. Vore, you coward, she screamed. Order demands sacrifice, Vore muttered, refusing to look at her. The guards lunged. Elias didn't think. He moved. Run, he shouted, shoving Sayalari toward the balcony. He grabbed a heavy statue from a pedestal and swung it, smashing the helmet of the lead guard. It bought them a second. Go, Elias roared, turning to face the squad. He felt Sayalari's hesitation, her agonizing desire to stay and fight. He pushed a wave of emotion through the bond, pure, unadulterated love and a command. If you stay, we both die. Find the truth. Sayalari looked at him one last time, tears streaming down her face. Then she vaulted over the railing, activating her gravity boots and plummeting into the shadows of the lower levels. Elias turned back to the guards just as a shock staff slammed into his ribs. The world went white, then black. Waking up was a mistake. Pain was the only reality. Elias hung from chains in a damp, dark cell. His blue tunic was shredded, his skin a map of burns and bruises. He didn't know how long he had been there. Hours? Days? Time was measured only in the intervals between the sessions. The door hissed open. A figure stepped in. It was not a torturer. It was the Emperor. Thaxion Vex looked at the human with a mixture of curiosity and disgust. He circled Elias, his robes trailing on the dirty floor. You are remarkably resilient for a mud dweller, Thaxion mused. My interrogators tell me you have not screamed yet. Elias spat a mouthful of blood onto the floor. I'm saving my voice for the encore. Thaxion chuckled. A dry, rattling sound. Defiance. I suppose that is what she saw in you. My daughter always did have a weakness for broken things. He stepped closer, grabbing Elias's chin and forcing his head up. Where is she? Thaxion demanded. Elias smiled, his teeth stained red. You're the Emperor. You tell me. Thaxion's face hardened. He released Elias and wiped his hand on a silk handkerchief. It does not matter. She will come. When we broadcast your execution tomorrow during the royal trials, she will come. She is too noble to let you die alone, and then I will end her line and start anew. He turned to the door. Enjoy your last night, human. Tomorrow, you become an example. The door slammed shut. Elias sagged in his chains when his body was screaming, broken in a dozen places. But in the silence of the cell, he closed his eyes and reached out. He searched the darkness of his mind. And there, faint but steady, like a candle in a storm, he felt her. She was alive. She was moving. She was angry. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Give them hell. Princess, he thought, sending the feeling out into the void. Sailari was not running. She was hunting. She had shed the cleric's robes. She had stolen a set of armor from a dead guard in the lower levels. She moved through the underbelly of the capital satellite, a ghost in the machine. She could feel Elias's pain. It was a dull, constant ache in her own body, a phantom agony that mirrored his torture. Every time they burned him, her skin felt hot. Every time they struck him, she flinched. But the pain did not break her. It sharpened her. She needed a weapon, not a gun, not a blade. She needed a truth so powerful it would shatter her father's throne. She made her way to the oldest sector of the satellite, a place sealed off for centuries. The Temple of Binding. It was a ruin, a relic of the time before the Empire turned to conquest. Dust coated the floor. The statues of the ancient gods were headless, decapitated by Thaxion's decree. This was where her mother had spent her final days. Sailari walked to the central altar. It was a simple stone, unadorned. She placed her hand on it, pulsing her bioenergy into the rock. Mother, she whispered, guide me. The altar hummed. A hidden compartment slid open. Inside was not a weapon, but a simple data crystal, pulsing with a soft, white light. Sailari picked it up and inserted it into her gauntlet's reader. A hologram flickered to life. It was her mother, Empress Lyra. She looked young, sad, and beautiful. Sailari, the hologram spoke, her voice echoing in the empty temple. If you are seeing this, then the darkness has fallen. Your father has rewritten our history. He teaches that the Zelari are pure, that we stand alone. The hologram shifted, showing images of the ancient past. Sailari gasped. The images showed Zelari standing side by side with other species, hulking reptiles, slender avians, and humans. They were not conquering them. They were embracing them. The golden light of the soul bond connected them all. Our strength was never in our purity, Lyra's voice continued. It was in our capacity to connect. The soul bond was not just for us. It was a gift we shared with the galaxy to create peace. We bound ourselves to others to end wars, to understand our enemies until they became our kin. Your father feared this. He feared that by mixing our souls we would lose our power. So he outlawed the truth. He killed the bonds. The image returned to Lyra. He killed me because I refused to renounce my bond with a human diplomat. I did not die of sickness. Sailari. I was executed. Sailari fell to her knees. The lie was so vast it was suffocating. Her mother had loved a human. She was half-sister to the species her father despised. The truth is the weapon, Lyra said, her image fading. Show them what we were. Show them that love is the only true power. The hologram died. Sayalari knelt in the dust, clutching the crystal. The grief was overwhelming, but beneath it, a cold fury began to rise. Her father was not just a tyrant. He was a murderer of history. He had turned their greatest gift into a crime. She stood up. The pain from Elias spiked in her chest, sharp, urgent. He was running out of time. Sayalari slotted the crystal into a secure pouch on her belt. She checked the charge on her stolen plasma rifle. She looked at the headless statues of the old gods. "I am done praying," she said to the silence. She turned and walked out of the temple. She had the truth. Now she just had to live long enough to scream it to the world. The Imperial Plaza was a canyon of white stone and screaming silence. 100,000 citizens of the Zalari Empire stood in the tiered galleries that rose like cliffs on all sides. They were silent, waiting. The air smelled of ozone and anticipation. In the center of the plaza, on a raised obsidian dais, Commander Elias Rourke knelt. He was not looking at the crowd. He was looking at his own blood pooling on the black stone. His body was a wreck. One eye was swollen shut. His ribs were a jagged cage of agony, and his wrists were bound in heavy gravity cuffs that pulled his arms down with the weight of a collapsing star. But he was breathing. Above him, hovering on a repulsor platform draped in crimson banners, stood Emperor Thaxion Vex. Thaxion looked like a god of death. His armor was black, absorbing the harsh sunlight of the capital satellite. His voice, amplified by the plaza's acoustic dampeners, boomed out, shaking the very marrow of Elias's bones. "Behold the rot," Thaxion declared, gesturing to the kneeling human. "Behold the weakness that seeks to infect our bloodline. This creature is not a warrior. It is a parasite. It crawled from the mud of a dead world to pollute the purity of the Zalari." Elias spat a mouthful of red saliva onto the pristine obsidian. He tried to stand, but the gravity cuffs slammed him back down, forcing a grunt of pain from his throat. The Emperor smiled, a cruel, thin expression. "My daughter, the Princess Sayalari, was deceived," Thaxion continued, his voice dropping to a mockingly sorrowful register. "She was bewitched by the primitive pheromones of this species. But the infection ends today. We do not cure a virus. We burn it out." A cheer began to rise from the galleries, a low, rumbling vibration that sounded like a landslide. Thaxion raised a hand, silencing them. "Bring out the cleanser." A massive gate at the far end of the plaza ground opens. From the darkness emerged a nightmare. It was a Zalari, but twisted by genetic modification until it barely resembled a sentient being. It stood 8 feet tall, its muscles bulging under thick, gray plating. Its lower jaw had been replaced with a mechanical mandible, and in its hand, it dragged a massive double-bladed executioner's axe that hummed with plasma energy. Elias looked at the monster. He felt the cold grasp of fear, but beneath it, he felt something else, a pulse, a heat in his chest. "Hold on." The voice was not in his ears when it was in his soul. Elias lifted his head. He grinned, a bloody, broken expression that confused the executioner as it stomped closer. "You are late," he whispered. The sky above the plaza shattered. It was not a figure of speech. The atmospheric shield that protected the capital satellite from the vacuum of space detonated in a blinding flash of blue light. Debris rained down like meteors. Through the smoke and falling fire, a ship descended. It was not an Imperial dreadnought. It was a jagged, ugly, beautiful patchwork of stolen parts and welded hull plates, the flagship of the outcast fleet. and flanking it were hundreds of smaller vessels, mining skiffs, cargo haulers, and old rebellion fighters. The crowd screamed, panic rippling through the galleries like a wave. The lead ship roared over the plaza, its engines screaming defiance. A figure leaped from the open cargo bay, plummeting 500 feet toward the dais. She hit the ground with the force of a meteor strike. The impact cracked the obsidian slab, sending a shockwave of dust and stone flying outward. When the dust cleared, Princess Sayalari Vex stood between Elias and the executioner. She was not wearing the black armor of the Empire. She was clad in armor of blinding white and gold, the ancient warplate of her mother, Empress Lyra. Her silver hair was loose, whipping around her face like a storm cloud. Her golden eyes were burning with a ferocity that made the executioner hesitate. Sayalari raised her mother's sword, a blade of pure, singing crystal. "He is not an infection," she screamed, her voice amplified by her suit's comms, drowning out the sirens. "He is my choice." Thaxion, up on his hover platform, stared down in shock. "Treason," he roared, his composure shattering. "Kill them! Kill them all!" The sky turned into a slaughterhouse. The rogue fleet engaged the Imperial defense drones. Lasers crossed the air like a chaotic web of light. Explosions blossomed against the artificial horizon of the satellite. Debris from destroyed fighters rained down into the crowd, turning the orderly execution into a stampede. On the dais, the executioner roared, a mechanical grinding sound, and charged. Sayalari moved to intercept, but 3 Imperial Praetorian guards dropped from the Emperor's platform, surrounding her with crackling shock staves. "Sayalari!" Elias shouted. Behind him, the executioner ignored the princess. It had its orders. It raised the plasma axe, preparing to split Elias in two. Elias looked at the axe. He looked at the gravity cuffs binding his wrists. He had seconds. He didn't try to break the chains. He dove forward. As the axe descended, Elias rolled directly between the executioner's legs. The blade slammed into the obsidian where his head had been a fraction of a second before. Sparks showering the air. Elias scrambled up behind the monster. The gravity cuffs made his arms heavy, but he used that weight. He swung his bound fists like a wrecking ball, slamming the heavy metal cuffs into the executioner's knee joint. There was a sickening crunch of metal and bone. The giant roared and stumbled, and Elias didn't stop. He was running on pure adrenaline and the rage of a man who had been tortured for 3 days. He jumped onto the executioner's back, wrapping the chain of his cuffs around the creature's thick throat. The executioner thrashed, throwing itself backward to crush the human. Elias held on, choking the life out of the beast. He pulled the chain tighter, his biceps screaming, the metal biting into the creature's windpipe. "Die, you ugly bastard!" Elias gritted out. The executioner dropped its axe. It clawed at the chain, its mechanical jaw snapping uselessly. Elias pulled harder, channeling every ounce of his frustration, every ounce of the pain Thaxion had inflicted on him. With a final guttural snap, the creature's neck gave way. The massive body went limp, crashing to the ground with a thud that shook the dais. Elias stood up, panting, covered in gray alien blood. He looked around. The fighting in the plaza had stopped. The crowd, the guards, even the Emperor, they were staring at him. They had expected a victim. They had expected a soft, fleshy human to be pasted across the floor. Instead, they saw a man standing over the corpse of an apex predator, his eyes wild, his spirit unbroken. Elias spat blood again. "Is that all you got?" he roared at the Emperor. Thaxion looked horrified. The narrative of human weakness, the cornerstone of his propaganda, had just been strangled on live television. Sayalari finished the last Praetorian guard, driving her crystal sword through his chest plate. She turned and saw Elias standing over the fallen giant. The bond between them flared brighter than the exploding ships above. It was a rush of pride, of love, of absolute awe. She engaged her jump jets and landed beside him, and she didn't speak. She grabbed the front of his ruined tunic and kissed him. It was a kiss of war. It tasted of blood and ash. It was a promise that if they died, they would die as one. When she pulled back, she pressed a device against his cuffs. The gravity locks disengaged with a hiss, falling to the ground. "Can you move?" she asked, breathless. Elias rubbed his wrists. "I can run. I can fight. I can dance if you need me to." "We are storming the Senate," Sayalari said, pointing to the massive golden doors behind the Emperor's platform. "The broadcast array is in the central chamber. We have to show them the truth." "Let's go say hello to your dad," Elias said. They charged. Thaxian's platform retreated toward the Senate doors, the Emperor screaming for reinforcements. But the chaos was absolute. The rogue fleet was strafing the ground defenses, keeping the heavy armor pinned down. Sayalari and Elias moved through the smoke, a blur of white armor and blue determination. They reached the Senate doors. Sayalari didn't bother with the keypad. She slapped a breaching charge on the lock. "Cover!" she shouted. They dove behind a pillar as the doors blew inward in a shower of molten gold. They sprinted into the Senate chamber. It was empty of senators. They had fled when the attack began. Only the floating pods remained, drifting aimlessly. In the center of the room, standing by the master control console, was Thaxian. He was frantically trying to initiate a system purge, his hands shaking over the holographic interface. He was trying to delete the archives, to burn the history before it could be revealed. "Father." Sayalari's voice echoed through the vast chamber. Thaxian spun around. He drew his own weapon, a jagged sword of black energy that crackled like a tear in space. "You!" he hissed. "You ungrateful, traitorous wretch! I gave you a galaxy, I gave you perfection, and you throw it away for this animal!" Sayalari walked forward, her sword lowered. Elias flanked her, picking up a discarded shock staff from a dead guard. "I am throwing away your lies, Father," Sayalari said calmly. She reached into her pouch and pulled out the data crystal she had recovered from the temple. "This is the truth. Mother didn't die of sickness. You murdered her. You murdered her because she loved you." Thaxian's face twisted into a mask of hate. "She was weak. She polluted our line, just like you." He lunged. The Emperor was old, but he was powerful. He moved with a speed that belied his age, the black energy sword swinging in a deadly arc. Sayalari parried, her crystal blade clashing with his dark weapon. The impact sent a shockwave through the room. They traded blows, a blur of white and black. Sparks flew as they fought up the steps of the central podium. Elias tried to intervene, but Thaxian used a telekinetic blast from his gauntlet to knock the human backward into a row of seats. "You cannot defeat me!" Thaxian screamed, driving Sayalari back. "I am the state. I am the blood." He struck her hard, a blow that cracked her white breastplate and sent her sprawling to the floor. Her sword skittered away, out of reach. Thaxian stood over her, raising the black sword for the killing blow. "I will build a better daughter from your ashes," he snarled. He swung the sword down. "No!" Elias didn't think, he didn't calculate. He just moved. He threw himself over Sayalari's body. The black sword didn't hit Sayalari. It slammed into Elias's back. The sound was terrible, the hiss of searing flesh and the crunch of bone. Elias screamed, his body arching in agony, but he did not move. He shielded her. "Elias!" Sayalari shrieked. Thaxian ripped the blade free, preparing to strike again. But the moment the blade left Elias's body, something happened. The bond exploded. Sayalari felt Elias's pain. She felt his life force flickering. And in that moment, Her grief transformed into a power that transcended physics. Her eyes went pure white. The air in the chamber dropped to absolute zero. She didn't reach for her sword. She reached out with her hand, a blast of pure bioenergy, fueled by the dying screams of her soulmate, erupted from her palm. It hit Thaxion in the chest. The Emperor was thrown backward as if hit by a freight train. He slammed into the master control console, shattering the interface. Sailari scrambled out from under Elias. She looked at him. He was pale, his eyes losing focus, blood bubbling from his lips. "Hold on," she sobbed, pressing her hands to his wound. "Do not you dare leave me, Elias Rourke. Do not you dare." She looked up at her father. Thaxion was struggling to stand, coughing up blood. He laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "He dies." Thaxion wheezes, "And you are nothing without him." Sailari stood up. She picked up her mother's crystal sword. She walked toward her father. "You are right," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "I am nothing without him. But I am everything against you." Thaxion tried to raise his hand, tried to summon his guards, but Sailari was too fast. She didn't flourish the blade. She didn't make a speech. She simply drove the crystal sword through her father's heart. Thaxion Vex, Emperor of the Thousand Suns, gasped. His eyes widened. He looked at his daughter one last time, seeing not fear, but judgment. He slid off the blade and collapsed to the floor. The black energy of his sword faded and died. Silence filled the chamber. Sailari didn't look at the body. She turned and ran back to Elias. He was barely breathing. The wound on his back was catastrophic. The bond was fading, a thin fraying thread in her mind. "Elias," she whispered, cradling his head in her lap. He opened his eyes. They were hazy. "Did we win?" he whispered, his voice a rattle. "Yes," she cried, tears falling onto his face. "Yes, we won." "Good." Elias smiled weakly. "Now, about that honeymoon." His eyes closed. His chest stopped moving. "No!" Sailari screamed. She did what she had done in the jungle. She placed her hands on his chest. She closed her eyes. She reached into the core of her being, past the exhaustion, past the grief, into the burning center of her life force. She poured it all into him. "Live," she commanded the universe. "Take me, take my crown, take my blood, but let him live." She pushed until her own vision went gray. She pushed until her heart stuttered. She pushed until she felt herself slipping away into the void. And then, a spark, beneath her hands, a heart stuttered, then beat again. Elias gasped, a desperate inhalation of air. Sailari slumped forward, her forehead resting on his shoulder. She was empty. She was broken. But she felt the thread of the bond snap back into place, strong and bright. Around them, the master control console, damaged by Thaxion's fall, began to spark. The data crystal Sailari had inserted earlier finally finished its upload. Above the Senate chamber, and on every screen across the Empire, from the massive displays in the plaza to the personal data pads of soldiers on the front lines, the image changed. It wasn't the Emperor's face. It was the hologram of Empress Lyra, and behind her, the images of the ancient unity. The fighting outside slowed. Soldiers looked up at the sky. They saw the truth. They saw Zalarian humans holding hands. They saw the lie they had been fighting for evaporate. Inside the chamber, Sailari lifted her head. She looked at Elias, who was breathing steadily now, though unconscious. She looked at her dead father. She looked at the hologram of her mother. She kissed Elias's forehead. "Rest, my love," she whispered. "The running is over." She stood up, shaky but upright. She walked to the console and activated the microphone. Her face, bloodied, scarred, and fierce, appeared on every screen in the galaxy. She didn't look like a princess. She looked like a survivor. "People of Zalari," she said, her voice ringing with the authority of pain. "The Emperor is dead. The war of purity is over." She looked directly into the camera. "My name is Sayalari Vex, and today we start telling the truth. The death of an emperor does not bring peace. It brings a vacuum, and vacuums are violent things. For 3 months following the death of Thaxion Vex, the galaxy held its breath. The empire did not simply dissolve, it fractured like a sheet of glass struck by a hammer. In the core worlds, loyalist generals seized control of the shipyards, declaring Sayalari a patricide and a traitor to the blood. They broadcast images of her standing over her father's corpse, calling for her execution. In the Outer Rim, however, she was something else entirely. To the enslaved species, the miners, and the conscripted soldiers, she was the breaker of chains. They painted her symbol, a white hand gripping a human hand, on the hulls of their skiffs and the walls of their hab blocks. Sayalari stood on the observation deck of the Star Sovereign, watching the capital satellite rotate below her. She looked tired. The white armor of her mother was gone, replaced by a tunic of simple gray weave. She did not look like a conqueror. She looked like a woman trying to hold a hurricane together with her bare hands. "They want you to take the throne," Elias said, walking up behind her. He was walking without a cane now, though his gait still held a slight hitch from where the executioner had crushed his knee. The scars on his back, where the black energy blade had struck him, were silver lines against his skin, permanent reminders of the price they had paid. "I know what they want," Sayalari replied, not turning. "They want another emperor. They want a single voice to tell them who to hate and who to obey. It is easier than thinking for themselves." Elias leaned against the railing beside her. The bond between them was calm, a steady, warm hum in the back of his mind. It was no longer the frantic, screaming connection of the war. It had settled into something deeper, a constant awareness of her presence. Like a gravity he could not escape. "And what do you want?" he asked. Sayalari turned to him. Her golden eyes were clear. "I want to burn the throne," she said. She kept her word. 2 days later, Sayalari Vex entered the Senate chamber. She did not sit in the obsidian chair of her father. Instead, she ordered it destroyed. Zalari workers, using plasma torches, cut the massive seat of power into slag while the cameras of the galaxy watched. In its place, she established the Concordat of Stars. It was messy. It was chaotic. But it was the first time in 1,000 years that the species of the galaxy sat in a room without chains. Elias watched from the gallery as the first session began. He saw Zalari warlords sitting uncomfortably across from aquatic diplomats of the hegemony. He saw avian delegates arguing trade routes with former imperial governors. And, most jarring of all, he saw the humans. A delegation from the United Earth Coalition had arrived within the week, escorted by the rogue fleet. They walked into the Senate with wary eyes, their hands hovering near their sidearms. They looked at the Zalari with hatred, and the Zalari looked back with disgust. But they sat. Sayalari stood in the center of the ring. She spoke not of purity, but of survival. She spoke of the threat that lurked in the dark space between stars, the economic collapse that would kill them all if they continued to fight. She was brilliant. She was terrifying. She commanded the room not with fear, but with the sheer weight of her will. Elias felt a swell of pride surge through the bond. She felt it, and he saw her glance up at him, a fleeting smile touching her lips before she turned back to berate a stubborn trade minister. She was building a future. And for the first time, Elias wondered if there was a place in it for him. That question came to a head a week later in the medbay of the Earth flagship, the UES Horizon. Elias sat on the biobed, buttoning his shirt. Opposite him stood Admiral Vance, a man with hair like steel wool and a face carved from granite. "You have done a hell of a job, son," Vance said, looking at Elias's medical chart. "Intelligence is still trying to parse half the data you sent us. The tech specs on their jump drives alone will jump human engineering forward by 50 years. "I didn't do it for engineering," Admiral Elias said quietly. Vance nodded, his expression softening slightly. "We know. The diplomatic reports are colorful, a soul bond. The scientists are calling it a bioquantum entanglement. They want to study you. Elias, back on Earth." Elias froze. Back on Earth. The words hung in the air. He thought of the blue sky of his home. He thought of rain that didn't smell like sulfur. He thought of real coffee and baseball and the sound of wind in pine trees. "We are leaving in 2 days," Vance continued. "We have a berth for you. You are a hero, Commander. There will be parades, promotions. You can write your own ticket. You can go home." Elias looked down at his hands. He looked at the silver scar on his palm, the matching mark to the one Sayalari carried. "Can I have some time to think, sir?" Vance studied him. "Don't take too long. Son, the window is closing." Elias walked out of the airlock and onto the docking arm of the capital satellite. The air was recycled and stale. He walked to the observation deck where he knew she would be. Sayalari was there, staring out at the stars. She wore the heavy robes of the counselor now, the weight of governance resting on her shoulders. The bond told him she knew. She felt his conflict. It tasted like ash in his mouth. "They offered you a ride," she said, her voice neutral. Elias stood beside her. "Admiral Vance says I am a hero. Says there are parades waiting." Sayalari gripped the railing. Her knuckles were white. "You should go." Elias looked at her. "Excuse me?" "You should go," she repeated, her voice tighter. "You have a home. Elias. A real one. Not this wreck of an empire. You have a family. You have a sky that does not try to kill you. You have served your purpose here. The war is over." Elias felt the sharp spike of pain radiating from her. She was shielding, trying to wall off her emotions, but the bond was too deep. He could feel her terror. She was pushing him away because she was terrified he would leave, and she wanted to be the one to cut the cord. "Is that what you want?" Elias asked. "You want me to leave?" Sayalari turned to him. Her eyes were wet. "I want you to be happy." "Elias," she snapped, "look at you. You are covered in scars because of me. You were tortured because of me. You nearly died a dozen times because I dragged you into my mess. I am selfish, but I am not cruel. I will not keep you as a pet in a world that hates you." Elias stepped closer. He reached out and took her hand. The static spark jumped between them, familiar and grounding. He looked at the stars. He looked at the Earthship docked in the distance. Then he looked at her. He realized something then. Earth was a place. It was geography. It was gravity and atmosphere. But it wasn't where he lived anymore. He lived in the space between two heartbeats. He lived in the golden fire of her eyes. "I asked the Admiral about the parades," Elias said softly. "I asked if they had anyone who could look at me and know exactly what I was feeling without me saying a word. I asked if Earth had anyone who would burn a galaxy down just to keep me breathing." Sayalari stared at him, a tear tracking through the lavender dust on her cheek. "And," she whispered, And he said no, Elias replied. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed the scar on her palm. I am not going anywhere, Sailari. You are stuck with me. Sailari let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She collapsed against him, burying her face in his chest. Elias wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight against the cold of space. I am staying, he whispered into her hair. But we are not staying here. This satellite, it's a tomb. If we are going to build a new world, we shouldn't do it in a graveyard. Where then? She asked. Elias smiled. I know a spot. Terrible landing zone. Lots of bugs. But the rent is cheap. The jungle of Zalari Prime had already begun to reclaim the crash site. Vines had wrapped around the shattered fuselage of Elias's U-29 Raptor, turning the weapon of war into a trellis for blooming moon orchids. The scorched trench where he had landed was now a river of wildflowers, their petals glowing with bioluminescent soft blue light in the twilight. It took them 3 months to build the house. They didn't use nanites. They didn't use drones. They used their hands. They scavenged metal from the wreckage and stone from the ruined temple. It was a simple structure, perched on the edge of the cliff overlooking the valley. It had a wide porch where they could watch the twin moons rise, and a roof that didn't leak, mostly. Sailari had resigned her position as High Counselor. She remained an advisor, a figurehead who could be called upon in crises, but she refused to rule. She handed the reins to a coalition of younger leaders, ones who hadn't been poisoned by the old hatreds. She spent her days hunting in the jungle, not for sport, but for food, often taking Elias with her. He was learning to move silently, learning to read the heat signatures of the forest. He was still clumsy compared to her, loud and soft-footed, but he was learning. One evening, they sat on the porch. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Elias was whittling a piece of ironwood. Sailari was cleaning her rifle, the movements rhythmic and familiar. The bond was quiet, a contented purr. Elias stopped whittling. He looked at her. The question had been nagging him for weeks, a splinter in his mind that he couldn't pull out. Sailari? She looked up, sensing the shift in his mood. Yes? Elias set the wood down. He looked out at the jungle, at the place where she had found him bleeding and broken. That day in the temple, he started, his voice hesitant. When you did the ritual, when you bonded us. Sailari went still. I remember. You said it was desperation, Elias said. You said it was the only way to save my life. And I believe you. But the Keeper, the AI in the archive, it said the bond connects fate. It said it merges souls. He turned to look at her. It's powerful stuff. Sailari. It rewrites biology. It floods the brain with oxytocin and dopamine and 1,000 alien chemicals I can't even pronounce. Sailari set the rifle down. She turned her body toward him, giving him her full attention. What are you asking, Elias? Elias took a breath. I am asking, how much of this is real? How much of what we feel is just the programming of the ritual? Would you still have chosen me, if the bond hadn't forced you to? The silence stretched out. The jungle chirped and hummed around them. Elias felt a spike of fear. He was afraid of the answer. He was afraid that he was just a biological imperative, a side effect of a magical tourniquet. Sailari stood up. She walked over to him. She took his hands and pulled him to his feet. She looked deep into his eyes. He could feel her mind opening to him, lowering every shield, every wall she had ever built. She let him see everything. She showed him the moment she first saw him in the wreckage, not the pity he thought she felt, but the spark of curiosity. She showed him the moment in the temple, before the ritual, when he had called her beautiful. She showed him the flush of heat she had felt, the sudden, terrifying realization that she wanted him to touch her. She showed him that the love hadn't started with the golden light. It had started with his sarcasm. It started with his kindness. "Elias," she said, her voice fierce and steady. "The bond saved your life. It connected our nervous systems. It lets me feel your pain and you feel mine, but it does not control my heart." She pressed her forehead to his. "The bond made us one," she whispered. "But it did not make me love you. I loved you when you made me laugh in a room full of death. I loved you when you sang to the children in the tavern. I loved you when you stood up to my father without a weapon." She pulled back slightly, her golden eyes blazing. "There was no bond strong enough to force what I already wanted. I chose you, Elias. I choose you every morning when I wake up, and I will choose you every day until the stars burn out." Elias let out a breath he felt he had been holding since the war ended. The doubt evaporated, burned away by the absolute truth of her words. "Okay," he whispered, his voice thick. "Okay." Sailari smiled, a soft, rare expression that made her scars look like works of art. "Now," she said, stepping back, "I have a question for you." She gestured to the valley below. "The mating rituals of my people are complex," she said. "They involve hunts, combat, and political alliances. But there is one part that is simple, the completion." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring. It wasn't gold or diamond. It was carved from the black stone of the temple and inlaid with a strip of the white metal from his crashed ship. "The bond we share was forced by circumstance," she said. "It was a medical necessity. We never finished the vows. We never made the choice in the eyes of our ancestors." She held the ring out to him. "Elias Rourke, human pilot, pain in my ass. Will you complete the bond, not to save your life, but to share it?" Elias looked at the ring. It was perfect. It was them, the stone of her world and the metal of his, bound together. He took the ring. He took her hand. He slid the band onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "I, Elias Rourke," he said, his voice steady, "take you, Sailari Vex, to have and to hold, through civil wars and alien jungles, through sonic showers and scary dads." Sailari laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "I take you," she replied, slipping a matching ring onto his finger, "as my mate, as my equal, as my heart." They stood there on the edge of the world, the wind whipping their hair. Then Sailari leaned in. "Kiss me, human." Elias obeyed. He kissed her, and the world fell away. It wasn't a kiss of desperation or war. It was a kiss of peace. It was a kiss of coming home. Above them, the sky began to change. The auroras of Zilari Prime ignited, great ribbons of green and violet light dancing across the stars. They shimmered and pulsed, reflecting in the river of wildflowers below. It was a moment of perfect stillness. The galaxy was vast and cold and dangerous. But here, on this rock, in this circle of arms, there was warmth. Elias pulled back, resting his chin on her head as they looked out at the horizon. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "It is," Sailari agreed. But as they watched, a shadow moved across the face of the distant moon. It was faint, a flicker in the void, a darkening of the stars in the far western quadrant, where the maps ended and the unknown began. Elias felt a prickle on the back of his neck. He felt Sailari stiffen in his arms. "You saw it too?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she whispered. "A disturbance. Deep space." Elias sighed. He looked at his wife. He looked at the peaceful home they had built. How long do you think we have? Selari narrowed her eyes, the warrior reawakening behind the piece. Long enough to prepare, she said. Elias smirked. He kissed her temple. Well, it wouldn't be us if it was easy. They stood together, watching the shadows stir in the deep dark. They were not afraid. They had dismantled an empire. They had rewritten the laws of biology. They had found each other in the wreckage of a collision that should have killed them both. Let it come, Elias thought. Let the shadows come. He felt Sayalari's heart beating against his own. Two rhythms, perfectly synced, driving a bioelectric signal that resonated brighter than the auroras above. Love began with a crash, but what they built was a galaxy's new heartbeat.